Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the launch event for the Lancet Commission on Peaceful Societies through Health Equity and Gender Equality. The Lancet Commission on Peaceful Societies finds that tangible and meaningful improvements in health equity and gender equality not only advance dignity and potential, but they also place societies on a pathway towards more enduring peace. I'm Sarah Barnes, Director of the Maternal Health Initiative at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. For those of you who are new to the Wilson Center, the Wilson Center is a Washington, D.C. based think tank chartered by Congress that provides nonpartisan counsel and insights on global affairs to policymakers through research, analyses, and independent scholarship. The Wilson Center is thrilled to host this Lancet Commission report launch and are very grateful to Val Percival, a very recent Wilson Center Fellow with the Maternal Health Initiative and the Canada Institute, for bringing this important work to the Wilson Center. The mission of the Canada Institute is to raise the baseline US level of knowledge of Canada and its engagements at the bilateral, regional, and global levels, particularly amongst the Washington, D.C. policy community. And the Maternal Health Initiative looks at the intersection of health and gender and the importance of both to US foreign policy and national security, making the findings and recommendations of this commission key to both of our programmatic efforts. Today, Val will be joined by other commission members, including the former president of Finland, Tarja Halonen, as well as our panel of leading experts and policymakers in the fields of global health, gender equality, peace, and security. And they will review the findings of the Commission's report and discuss its implications for global health and foreign policy. Thank you so much to these incredible experts for taking the time to walk us through the significance of this timely and valuable report. A huge thank you to the Canada Institute, the Environmental Change and Security Program, and the Middle East Program for co-sponsoring this event launch today. Thank you also to the Lancet, the leadership of the Commission, and B&B partners for the collaboration and the team effort to make today's event possible. If you are watching this launch live today, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to enter questions for our experts into the chat box on your screen. It's just below the webcast video. We will have an audience Q&A later in our program. You can also follow the discussion on Twitter at MHI_Wilson using the hashtag Peaceful Societies. A recording of this event will also be made available within 24 hours, and an event summary will be published on the .mom column of the New Security Beat blog. So without further ado, please let me introduce to you the moderator of today's launch event, Pam Das. Pam is the Senior Executive Editor at The Lancet. She is also the co-founder and a current member of The Lancet's racial equality group, GRACE, and an advisory board member of the Global Health Film Festival. She is a PhD science graduate in biochemistry, and prior to working at The Lancet, she spent some years as a medical writer and a journalist. Thank you so much, Pam, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And yes, good afternoon, morning, and evening, wherever you are. A very warm welcome from us. We're here to launch this extraordinary commission report. I am a senior executive editor at The Lancet, and I was the editor for this commission. So for me, it's a personal joy to be here after many years of working on this report. Now, the idea behind the work you're about to hear actually began in 2017. A conversation between Professor Peter Freiberg from Sweden and co-chair of the commission, who you'll hear from later in the launch, and Lancet's editor-in-chief, Richard Horton. At the time, Peter was mobilizing Swedish academia to be more committed to global health. He succeeded in creating the Swedish Institute for Global Health Transformation, also known as SITE, under the auspices of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, an independent, non-governmental organization whose overall objective is to promote the sciences and strengthen their influence in society. Now, Sweden has had a long-term history in promoting and working towards peace and security. Peter was interested in looking at the connections between peace and health. And then, from Richard Horton, he decided that why don't we add gender equality to the mix and look at that as a new angle to try and connect 3 of the major SDGs, 3, 5, and 16, on health, gender equality, and promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. So what's original about this work? Well, the SDGs, as we all know, many of us will know, are very much their own individual silos on specific topics and areas. But sustainable development will not be won by success in those individual silos. Sustainable development will be won by addressing the linkages at the interface of all the SDGs. So in the health community, we need to think outside just universal health coverage or maternal and newborn health or mental health or NCDs, which we've kind of been approaching in that way since the Millennium Development Goal era. We really need to make connections with the other SDGs. We've started to do so for SDG 13, which is to combat climate change. But with this commission, we're trying to break new ground. Linking gender equality and peace is not an easy combination to tackle, and not actually that obvious for those of us who are not in the fields of conflict, humanitarian work and peace. And it's been very difficult and complex, as you will hear. But taking a multidisciplinary approach by the commissioners with their expertise in health, gender, peace, conflict research and policy across a range of geographies and institutions, our view is that the authors have pulled together a spectacular body of work that holds much promise to place societies on a pathway towards more enduring peace. Now, the commission went live last night and can be accessed on the Lancet.com website. I really encourage you to check out the infographic, which beautifully summarizes the complexity of the report and its findings visually. As Sarah said, we're going to be having a terrific line of speakers today, and we want to engage you, the audience. So please do start thinking up your questions and put them into the chat box when that section of the launch begins. I'd like to now introduce our first speaker. We're going to start with a keynote address. It's our great honour to have here President Halonen, Commission Chair and former President of Finland, who will give her reflections on the importance of this commission. President Halonen, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Helsinki, from Finland. So this is a long-awaited day. I'm happy and a bit excited of the launch of the Lancet report. The world was already facing very big challenges when our Commission's work was launched in 2019. In many ways, these challenges have intensified in recent years. I take a few examples. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and deepened inequalities affecting the poorest the most. The pandemic also demonstrated in a dramatic way how deeply health is interconnected with the economy, social cohesion and stability of the society. Then gender equality is far away and today openly challenged by anti-gender movement. Third, we are fast approaching tipping points of climate change. Geopolitical divisions are growing and conflicts are increasing. A quarter of the world's population living in a conflict-affected area. There is also war now in Europe with Russia's invasion in Ukraine, which has had also serious global impacts. So the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development remains the key to solving many of today's challenges. We are now at the halfway point in the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. And let's be honest, we are lagging behind on the implementation. Accelerated and united efforts are needed for a more sustainable world. The SDG Summit in New York in September is an important opportunity to scale up actions, and I hope we will get more action. New approaches are needed to enable communities and countries to transition out of harmful cycles of inequality and violence into beneficial cycles of equality and peace. So our Commission's objective to explore the untapped intersections, as you mentioned already, between the SDGs for health, it's goal number 3, gender equality, goal number 5, and peace, the goal number 16. It's even more vital to better understand and utilize the interconnection for implementation. More research on the interconnections will be needed, but I can say, I'm proud to say that what we have now done, this is a very good start. So, ladies and gentlemen, the message of the report we are issuing today is clear. Health equity and gender equality have a unique and powerful ability to contribute to peace. Improvements to health equity and gender equality can transform societal systems and enable communities to transition from harmful to beneficial cycles, putting them on a pathway to sustainable peace and well-being. So our research suggests that processes to advance health equity and gender equality are more powerful when they operate together through access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care. The report underlines that health equity and gender equality principles and processes must be led by communities and tailored to their context. So our report includes quite a series of case studies, including Afghanistan, El Salvador, Kosovo, that explores the promises of our theory of change. So as you know, the situation in Afghanistan only worsened since the Taliban took control again, and women and girls' rights are under a grave attack. The implications of the erasing women and girls from public life will be severe for the women themselves and the human rights, but also for the whole society. So, dear friends, finally, let me underline the role of gender equality. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and his predecessor, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon before him, have underlined, sustainable development will not achieve without progress in gender equality. So healthy people thrive and contribute to the resilience of communities and societies. Women are half of the population. Gender equality is a human right, but it's also the precondition for successful society. Women and girls often bear the heaviest burden in crises, including healthcare workers, family caretakers, or when facing violence or lack of essential services. On the other hand, women's participation in peace processes leads to more durable peace agreements, and their role in decision-making can critically strengthen the response and resilience of society. So let me say on behalf of the whole Commission that we much look forward to discussing the report's findings and to working together with you to build a more equal, healthier, peaceful and future for all of us. And if I might add that when I have been, I have my duties, and since I have been a chairperson, starting from the Millennium Goals, then with also the processes was conducted to the SDGs, and now here. So I do hope so that we continue and strengthen the discussions, which will be the sustainable development. It will be possible if we do our utmost. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Hallinan. Right, we will now have a presentation of the Commission given by Valerie Percival, who's the lead report author and Wilson Centre Fellow, and Dr. Carolyn Chisadza, Commissioner and Senior Lecturer at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Hand over to you both.
Thank you so much, Pam, and welcome everyone. The report brings together the work of many people and has benefited from the support of several organizations. Carolyn and I are presenting on behalf of our amazing and dedicated writing team, as well as the commissioners and authors listed on the report. We provide the names of these individuals and organizations at the end of the presentation. I'd like to say a special thank you to the Wilson Center, and particularly the Maternal Health Initiative and the Canada Institute for their support as we finalize the report and their efforts to make this launch happen. And we would also like to thank the Lancet for recognizing the role and responsibility of a scientific journal to encourage research on neglected issues of importance to policy, for challenging us to be bold while we explore this topic, and for guiding the report through a rigorous peer review process, which clearly strengthened its analysis and the conclusions. Next slide, please. The Commission recognizes that we're living in troubled times. An increasingly dangerous and unpredictable world lies ahead of us, and one in which there are more diagnoses of the problems than an identification of possible solutions. Communities and policymakers struggle to respond to multiple and overlapping crises, ranging from the social and economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, the impacts of climate change, including food insecurity and natural disasters, and rising violence. Next slide, please. This map, provided to us by the UPSALA Conflict Data Program, shows the widespread geographic distribution of fatalities from organized violence between 2000 and 2022. Next slide, please. This graph, also provided to us by UPSALA, shows the fatalities from the three forms of organized violence: non-state, state-based, and one-sided violence against civilians. The graph illustrates the significant and troubling increase in this violence in 2022, and this increase was largely driven by the conflicts in Ethiopia and Ukraine. Next slide, please. Complexity scientists call these overlapping and interacting challenges a polycrisis. In our interconnected world, this entanglement of crises makes their resolution much more difficult. But this polycrisis was not inevitable. It's a result of our collective failure to build more equitable and resilient economic, social, and political systems, as well as the scarcity of effective leadership at the national and global levels. So in the report, we use the framing of the polycrisis to illustrate how improvements to gender equality and health equity can provide a feasible and practical pathway for communities out of these harmful cycles of violence and inequity and into beneficial cycles of peace. Next slide, please. So before we go any further, like a good academic, I'd like to define our key terms. So health equity, the Commission uses, meaning everyone, regardless of identity or socioeconomic circumstance, should be able to enjoy universal access to quality health services, as well as essential medicines, vaccines, and technologies in a safe environment, respectful of individual autonomy, bodily integrity, dignity, and informed consent. Gender equality we define as ensuring that everyone, regardless of gender identity, can develop their human capabilities, access economic and broader public sector resources, live in safety and security, and also exercise agency. Next slide, please. As we've heard from several of the speakers already this morning, this Lancet Commission was launched and tasked with understanding the interrelationships amongst the three SDGs on health, gender equality, and peaceful societies. So we examined a specific question: can improved health equity and gender equality contribute to more peaceful societies? And if so, how? So while the world changed significantly over the course of the Commission's work, our goals did not. So we wanted to bring together different disciplines to examine this question. We wanted to establish an empirical foundation for the relationships among health equity, gender equality, and peace. And we also wanted to contribute to national and global policy development by providing practical and actionable guidance and recommendations to communities, civil society groups, states, and international institutions. Next slide, please. Our research reaches 4 conclusions about health equity and gender equality in relation to peaceful societies, and they form our main messages. So first, improvements to health equity and gender equality have a unique and powerful ability to contribute to peace. Second, to unleash the promise of the Commission's research, health equity and gender equality must be led from communities and tailored to their context, what we refer to as inside-out processes. Given our research, the Commission calls on the health sector to embrace, advocate for, and advance health equity and gender equality by implementing benchmarks for gender equal health responses. And our final message is that health equity and gender equality must be central to national and global processes to promote peace and well-being. Next slide, please. Identifying the independent role of health equity and gender equality and the dynamics of conflict and peace is challenging, as health and gender outcomes are shaped by broader social and economic processes and interact with each other in feedback loops. So to enable us to analyze these complex relationships, we adopted the concept of self-reinforcing cycles. So in these cycles, the interaction between the variables in the cycles leads to a change in their value, which in turn prompts further cycles of self-reinforcing interactions. How we describe those cycles really depends on our interpretation of the outcome. So the Commission describes harmful cycles as one in which health inequities, gender inequalities, and organized violence interact to reinforce each other. Beneficial cycles are one in which health equity, gender equality, and peace reinforce each other. And we know that in self-reinforcing cycles, a significant change in the value of one of the variables can prompt the dynamic of the cycle to shift. So this leads us to our theory of change, which is that health equity and gender equality improvements can enable societies to, over time, transition from harmful to beneficial cycles. So to relate this to the polycrisis, the influence of this beneficial cycle can aggregate over time and cascade across other political, economic, and social systems. Next slide, please. So in our research, we use several methods to explore our question as well as our theory of change. So to determine if these self-reinforcing cycles existed, we use statistical modeling, namely cross-national statistical analyses of the relationships among indicators of health equity, gender equality, and violence for the past 25 plus years. These statistical models examined if associations among these variables showed the existence of harmful cycles, of beneficial cycles, as well as supported our theory of change, which is improvements in the values of health and gender can prompt this transition from harmful to beneficial cycles. Then to examine how and why improvements in health equity and gender equality can lead to more peaceful societies, we undertook comprehensive literature reviews and case study reviews of countries as well as processes. These reviews included Afghanistan, Mozambique, Kosovo, the efforts of El Salvador and Kenya's health systems to address sexual and gender-based violence. We also reviewed pandemic models, the gendered impact of COVID, the role of women in peace processes, and gender norms in humanitarian engagement. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight what is new about our work. So while research and policy has discussed the potential role of health equity and gender equality leading to peace, our research is really new for several reasons. First, previous research has firmly established that conflict and insecurity have devastating impacts on health and gender equality outcomes, but they haven't looked at the reverse relationship. To our knowledge, before our report, there has been no systematic cross-national statistical analysis that examined health equity and gender equality as independent and interacting variables shaping violence and peace. Second, we provided this conceptual tool or framework of harmful and beneficial cycles. We know that health and gender outcomes interact with each other, and we know that they're embedded in these complex social, economic, and political contexts. This conceptual tool allows us to disentangle this role of health equity and gender equality and enable us to guide policy recommendations. And third, we provide this theory of change. Previous research has neglected to outline a theory for how and why, and particularly gender equality, can lead to peace. And we fill that gap. And we also outlined a research and policy agenda that was guided by the successes and failures of past initiatives. Next slide, please. Like all research, we faced several limitations. So I'd like to underscore that our research is exploratory in nature. We use both quantitative and qualitative approaches, but these are what we call in social science plausibility probes. They're not causal models. We definitely need further research charting out our theory of change and further case studies examining these processes at the granular level. We also experienced data limitations that impeded our ability to apply intersectional approaches at the subnational level, as well as positionality. The epistemology and training of the researchers and our position within society has influenced our ability to observe and interpret these health, gender, and conflict processes. Next slide, please. So let me provide just a little more detail on our findings. So this figure illustrates our framework and theory of change. So health inequity, gender inequality, and violence interact in self-reinforcing cycles with harmful effects. Health equity, gender equality, and peace interact in self-reinforcing cycles with beneficial effects. And our theory of change is that improvements in health equity and gender equality can, under the right conditions, transform these cycles to nudge communities from harmful to beneficial cycles. Next slide, please. We explored this framework and our theory of change in our cross-national statistical analysis. Our findings showed extensive support for harmful cycles, that health inequity and gender inequality and violence interact with each other. It showed support for health equity, gender equality, and peace interacting, and it also showed support for our theory of change. Statistical associations showed that improvements in health equity in particular can help transform these self-reinforcing cycles, nudging communities from harmful to beneficial cycles. Improvements in both health equity and gender equality help sustain communities within these beneficial cycles of peace. Next slide, please. Our research, as I mentioned, tried to unpack our theory of change and explore how and why improved health equity and gender equality place societies on this pathway to peace. So we argue that when improvements to health equity and gender equality are led by communities, they can be catalytic. Over the long term, they transform societies. They transform the way we see each other and individual agency and capabilities, and they challenge and shift power. We applied the Catherine Sikink and Thomas Rees framework on human rights norms. And we emphasize that you cannot realize either health equity or gender equality principles without working towards a social consensus on these principles. But building that social consensus requires tangible actions, which we call mechanisms. So these mechanisms include advocacy and the institutionalization of gender equality and health equity in formal systems. So for health equity, you clearly need to establish laws that recognize rights, provide health services and systems, and safeguard other determinants of health. Gender equality is institutionalized, again, through laws that support the principles of gender equality, but also by ensuring access to education, the ability to engage in the economy, access to technology and other infrastructure, as well as the ability to participate in civic life and politics. While these processes are extremely contentious and challenging, through them, capabilities of individuals and groups are transformed, which catalyzes economic, social, and political change. Economic change includes increased human capital and inclusive economic growth. Social changes include heightened social capital, particularly the social capital that bridges between groups, as well as changed social norms. And at the political level, there's evidence that health equity and gender equality can increase the quality of governance and improve the stronger and provide a stronger social contract. Next slide, please. So much more research is needed that traces out these processes within cases. Our research does provide support for this unique transformative role of health equity and gender equality. It's really hard to fake gender equality and health equity indicators. This requires definitive actions led by communities that are needed for sustained improvements. We highlight the role of advocacy, particularly the critically important role of advocates in advancing gender equality and health equity, and we see this in many ways in health processes. There's clear evidence of the role of advocates, particularly transnational advocacy networks, in expanding health equity through demands for access to treatments, access to vaccines. Institutionalization within national systems is also really, really important in terms of ensuring that health equity and gender equality are realized. And we provide the examples of case studies such as El Salvador, where they provided access to sexual and reproductive health services within dedicated facilities. And we also underscore that these processes are more powerful when health equity and gender equality work together. There is very clear and strong and convincing research of the important role of sexual and reproductive health and rights in boosting economic outcomes as well as social outcomes. And all of this has this long-term and transformative impact. So thank you, and I will now hand over to my colleague, Carolyn.
Thank you, Val. Next slide, please. So the report also furthers the previous work of the Lancet Gender Norms and Health series to examine how gender norms are reflected in the health services and systems, and how the health sector can perpetuate gender inequalities. We analyzed the gender-blind nature of COVID-19 responses, including pandemic modeling, and we highlight some challenges that we observed related to the granularity of the data collected during the pandemic. We also examined how the failure of the humanitarian sector to fully embrace gender equality has led to the tolerance of sexual exploitation and abuse with humanitarian settings. And we further outlined the reluctance of women and sexual and gender minorities to access health services, given their experiences of discrimination and abuse in the services that they will have received when they go to the health centers. Secondly, we do acknowledge and highlight that the health sector can be an important force for change. We reviewed research that documents how community health workers have advanced health equity and gender equality within their communities. The report argues that the health sector has the ability and the responsibility to promote gender equality. To guide the health sector in its role, we outline in the report benchmarks for the humanitarian sector and other health services to enable what we call gender equal health responses. Next slide, please. So the report also advocates for health equity and gender equality to be prioritized in all policy agendas, particularly those in fragile and conflict-affected settings. We have a promising foundation of norms, good institutions, and funding mechanisms upon which these policy initiatives can be built. But any policy initiative from the community to the global level must learn from the mistakes of the past. For example, health equity and gender equality efforts cannot be instrumentalized for the political, security, or foreign policy objectives of external actors. Imitation projects should be avoided. This is copying institutional structures from one setting and transplanting them to another. In addition, efforts to promote gender equality must be wary of the superheroine fallacy, where women are promoted as leaders and agents of transformation without sufficient efforts to address the structural conditions that enable broader gender equality within the society. The report also illustrates the importance of emerging opportunities, such as the significant contribution of digital technologies to advancing gender equality. While we often focus on the internet as mechanisms of disinformation and for exploitation and abuse, we do share evidence that access to the mobile internet is also associated with positive changes in attitudes towards gender equality. Therefore, efforts must be made to ensure these emerging opportunities
Carolyn, we've lost your sound.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you now, Carolyn. We lost you for about
Where did you lose me?
When you had just finished digital technologies.
Okay.
Yeah, you were,
If
you go from there.
Okay, all right. So that was the last point I was making. I'm sorry, load shedding here. So equality. So while we often focus on the internet as mechanisms of disinformation and for exploitation and abuse, we share evidence that access to the mobile internet is also associated with positive changes in attitudes towards gender equality. Efforts therefore must be made to ensure these emerging opportunities promote gender equality and health equity, rather than for us to repeat the missteps of the past. Next slide, please. So from our findings, we formulated some recommendations and the way forward as well. So in the report, we outlined 4 broad recommendations with an implementation pathway to help guide several actors, such as the civil society, national governments, philanthropies, bilateral development agencies, and multilateral institutions. This is really an initial effort to carve out these recommendations and their implementation, and would benefit from the engagement of those with experience working with advocacy organizations, philanthropies, and other major players within these sectors. So communities and context. The first recommendation was that communities and context should shape and drive gender equality and health equity initiatives for change from the inside out, as Val already pointed out. So the process of change should be endogenous. The second recommendation was that health responses should embrace, advance, and advocate for gender equality. Our third recommendation from our findings suggested that initiatives to advance health equity and gender equality should support openness, inclusivity, and accountability, and should also be data-driven. And the final recommendation that came out of our findings was that national and global agendas for development and conflict should incorporate health equity and gender equality. Next slide, please. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I just need to double check. Okay. So finally, we came up with, we formulated a learning agenda. And from here, we sort of give a path or a way forward from the report's findings, right? So the Commission raises as many questions as it answers, which I believe is the beauty of research, because it opens up avenues for even further exploration. To help guide the research moving forward, the Commission's report outlines a learning agenda. We divide this agenda into 3 categories. Under diversity of perspectives, we identify that there is a need to ensure that research partnerships between the global North and South are mutually beneficial. Advocates and scholars from the global South should have equitable access to research funding and leadership opportunities. We also need to tap into the power of networks to facilitate the linking of researchers, advocates, and policymakers from around the world. An excellent example is the Gender and Public Emergencies Working Group, facilitated by Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. To disentangle these dynamic relationships that are highlighted in this report, we need to encourage a diversity of methods ranging from quantitative to critical scholarship that furthers the empirical evidence base, while also at the same time unpacking power and the drivers of structural inequalities. Under research approaches, we identified the need for interdisciplinary co-production of research. We also need governments and agencies working on health and gender equality initiatives to undertake implementation research so that we can better understand the challenges of implementing change on the ground. We need these organizations to fully commit to sharing data and evidence-based assessments. And finally, under research themes, we identified key knowledge gaps in terms of the experiences of particular communities that emerged from our research. These communities included displaced populations and sexual and gender minorities. We also highlight the importance of exploring topics such as the distinctiveness of health, the need for more research on the social and political determinants of health, gender, and social trust. We also point out the need to apply theories of conflict analysis to explore the dynamics of the backlash against women's rights and health interventions in different types of conflict environments. Next slide, please. This brings us to the end of our presentation with Val. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And again, we are grateful to the co-authors of the report listed here, as well as the generosity of our funders, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Sweden, the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, Finland, and Canada's International Development Research Center, not forgetting the Wilson Center and the Lancet for facilitating this launch. We hope that civil society, academics, and political leaders from all levels will consider the Commission's findings as they work to build a more peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie and Carolyn, for presenting the Commission report. That was extremely clear for what was a very complex report. We are very pleased to have with us a panel of stakeholders to provide some reactions and reflections to the report. The very people, in fact, that the recommendations of the report are aimed at. So we'd welcome questions from the audience as well. And I'll ask Valerie and Carolyn to join at some point to a much broader panel discussion. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up is Dr. Ahmed Al-Mandari, who is the Regional Director for Eastern Mediterranean, the EMRO region of WHO. Next, we have Dr. Ala Murabit, the Director of Programme Advocacy and Communications for Health at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a UN High-Level Commissioner on Health, Employment, Economic Growth, and the UN SDG Global Advocate. And finally, Chris Milligan, former councillor at USAID, who's had 3 decades of experience advancing development and humanitarian goals, particularly in countries in crisis or political transition. Sorry. Welcome to all of you. I will begin with a question for each of you. So, Dr. Mandari, if I could start. What are the implications of the report for how WHO and member states in the EMRO region engage in health programming? And to follow up, how can we ensure health programming supports gender equality whilst also facilitating the conditions for more peaceful societies?
Thank you very much, Ms. Das, for these questions and for the opportunity that you gave us as WHO EMRO to be part of this important and special event. And before I start, just I would like to share, before I share my thinking on this topic, please allow me to congratulate the Lancet and its partners, partner organizations, for the successful conclusion of this important commission. And we are all looking forward, to have the recommendations and really work on it as per the guidance and the presentation shared earlier. And also, I would like just to commend the efforts of President Taria, Richard Horton, Professor Peter, and the Commission members. It was quite challenging work, to identify and present evidence on contribution of health and gender towards promoting and sustaining peaceful societies around the globe. The Commission findings, in fact, are very relevant to us here in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And as you know, all colleagues, the region, as we know now, unfortunately, ranks as one of the least peaceful regions in the world. and it is really heartbreaking. When we look at statistics of health equity and gender equality, the situation is also not inspiring in our countries due to reasons that I'm sure many of you are aware. In 2021, IMRO Commission on Determinants of Health documented evidence on seriousness of gender inequalities and health inequities among 22 countries of the Eastern Mediterranean region at different levels. And this Lancet Commission has further confirmed this evidence. I will first, talk about health and peace component of the Commission report. In our region, public health leaders have long recognized that peace and healthcare interlinked together. However, our efforts, in fact, to get engaged in peace agenda were limited despite that sort of inspiring direction from our leaders. We were reluctant to discuss and do something about it. In 2019, I made a push together with the government of Oman and Switzerland to initiate Health for Peace initiative, which we called initially HOPE. Our inspirations were similar to those of Lancet Commission. I'm really very pleased to see that. Our priority was to conduct advocacy with public health and political leaders on this issue. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, our efforts on health and peace continued. The intention was to rally the region behind one cause of saving lives and promoting health during the pandemic itself, added with the conflicts and instabilities many of our countries and societies are suffering from. A key lesson we learned in this process is that health and peace require a holistic approach in design and implementation. It is not just an advocacy that we need to take. I am glad that the Lancet Commission has emphasized a way forward in similar holistic direction. Colleagues, as I believe that public health community can make the best use of health programming, which is a powerful tool to both, promoting and sustaining peace. In countries affected by the conflict, for example, health actors need to embrace peace as one of their goals, as have been recommended by the Commission. We as health community must assertively say and act upon it that there is no health without peace, and there is no peace without healthy societies. Instead of, only meeting the needs of healthcare of people in such countries, which is important, we should also carefully analyze the drivers of conflict. Otherwise, we will not be able to move forward. We have to identify the root causes. We should, embed conflict analysis in health emergencies or health programming to make it result-oriented for both health and peace outcomes. We also have, already started working on this here in the region. For example, in Yemen, our latest country cooperation strategy, which is an instrument to define WHO priorities in the country, we have included health and peace as a clear objective in that strategy, and we are working on it with the authorities at different locations and levels. In countries which have faced conflict for decades, societies are deeply affected. And say, for example, Somalia, Afghanistan, as you have mentioned it. Psychosocial support for priority groups in society, such as women and young people, can help us build healthier, happier, and peaceful societies. We have had, as I said, a program in Somalia with the similar intention, working with UN Peace Building Fund and non-governmental organization. In other conflict-affected countries, we are promoting a health development and peace nexus approach. We also need health, humanitarian, and development workers to be trained in peace skills. They are traditionally trained in public health outcomes, but they are not trained the same way on peace. And that's why we have to do it that way. And this is necessary to be successful in harnessing the potential of health for building and sustaining peace in these countries. Now, regarding your second part of the question, gender equality, there is so much to do, as the Lancet Commission has highlighted. Gender inequality is present in all regions, but unfortunately, particularly deep in persistent in the Eastern Mediterranean region due to the same reasons. And there is a complex, web of political, social, economic, and system-related reasons behind the widespread gender inequality in our countries. We recognize them, but realistically, to be honest, we cannot tackle all at once. We have to be methodical, and persistent to fight gender inequality and benefit from its true potential. We are working on efforts in legislative and governance areas and through health programs to shift societal norms about gender roles. There is also progress, such as increasing number of women in political institutions, health workforce, and other sectors, and we witness it in different countries. However, we admit it is happening in a bit slow manner. It is progressing slowly. Countries which are, conflict affected pose a difficult challenge for us to work on gender agendas, such as Afghanistan, as have been mentioned by President Tariq. However, we are determined to move forward, and we are doing that, and we are determined to do that. Demonstrating a walk the talk approach in WHO as an organization, we have increased the number of women leaders and staff in different capacities in the region here. I have, in fact, most of my senior assistants and colleagues in the regional office and country offices as WRs, many of them are, in fact, women. And they are successfully leading it in a very nice way. For the first time now, we have almost equal number of women heading WHO country teams to men, in 17 countries where we have WHO offices in the Eastern Mediterranean region. In my own management team, as I said, there is a balance of women and men in the leadership role, and I'm really proud to work with them. I have worked with ministers of health and continue to work with them on addressing gender disparities. And I believe that, to bring a role model is more helpful than only raising their attention toward the issue. Like health and peace, gender and peace agenda also need a 360-degree view and action to ensure that decreasing gender disparities result in increasing prospects of peace in societies. And before I conclude, colleagues, just I would like to say that we really appreciate the Commission on acknowledging the limitation of available evidence. I wholeheartedly, in fact, believe that this area needs more research, particularly practical research that will guide us more on the field. We need now tools which are applicable in field, and we need to know which skills work better than other among workers of healthcare and other sectors, which are helpful to promote and sustain peace and advance gender equality. And I would like to say that WHO IMRO has been pleased to be part of the Lancet Commission network. We are pleased to take its recommendation forward on advancing health, gender for peace agenda in our region, and I assure you that we are all committed for that. We would like also to see more events of dissemination of the Commission findings and its recommendation in our region. And we will be pleased to collaborate with the Lancet and its partners. The message of this Commission need to go far beyond and wide, as much as possible. This will not only help all stakeholders on the advocacy front, but will definitely also provide an opportunity to put the wisdom of the Commissioner's report into practice in the field. And as I said, walking the talk. Thank you very much, Ms. Das, and I'm sorry if I took this much time, but I again would like to congratulate you all on the Commission achievement and looking forward, to collaborating together to implement its recommendations in different societies, countries in the region and beyond. Back to you, Ms. Das. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Mandari, and for your extraordinary leadership that you're showing in the region. And we do indeed hope we can work together, which I'm sure we will be able to do. If I can now go to the more sort of advocacy arm of our discussions. Dr. Marabit, as you are all too aware, advocacy to promote the principles and mechanisms of gender equality and health equity is extremely challenging. What are some of the best practices for how to support and not endanger advocates as they work to advance the principles and mechanisms of gender equality and health equity within their societies?
Thank you, Pamela. That's an excellent question. And I echo Dr. Mandari's congratulations and gratitude, I think, for this commission. And, you know, I think things often change when we dare to ask the questions about why they are the way they are and how we can do better. And that is exactly what's happened here. As you know, I actually started as a local advocate. I think the numbers start creeping up. But about 13 years ago, when I founded the Voice of Libyan Women in Libya, and there are the obvious kind of low-hanging fruit. There's the safety, ensuring that advocates have communication tools and effective safety protocol. There's no doubt about that. There's training and ensuring that they have effective training. There's ensuring that they're well connected and networked and able to communicate with multilateral and international institutions as well as their national and regional counterparts. But I'm actually not going to focus on kind of the nuts and bolts safety and security. I think it's hypercritical, but I actually think where we need to put just as much, if not more, investment, energy, time, and commitment really is in the flexible funding, in amplifying voices, and ensuring that we are providing, to Dr. Mandari's point, comprehensive support. So we're showing up and we're saying, okay, first and foremost, we're going to really amplify and elevate the local voices and lived experiences. And international organizations and partners will really play a supporting role, where we'll take our microphones and we'll make sure that they go to those who are on the ground doing the work. And that has to be married to some sense of financial support. There needs to be flexible funding that allows advocates to really shift their strategies because the situations are so evolving. So I've seen, grant, applications that are 20 pages long. And if you're in the middle of a conflict, or if your internet keeps cutting out, or if you aren't sure you're even going to be able to access those applications, it seems unrealistic at best. But when the situation is so fluid, you need funding that actually works in that same way. And lastly, we often talk about the importance of collaboration. We often talk about the importance of recognizing that there are voices that are uniquely able to deliver particular messages. We don't appreciate that goes both ways. There's a very frequent kind of, for lack of a better word, tokenization of getting local voices onto global stages, but not appreciating that local voices are actually the ones that often have the most influence and power, even locally. And when they come and say, hey, listen, this isn't, and we've all been in those meetings where someone says, well, we'll consult the local community. And the local community will often say, we don't need to be consulted. We need to co-architect this with you. We actually know what some of the real challenges are in the community. We know what some of the real friction is in the community. We know what some of the real, that those unsaid challenges that you're not going to be able to find in your research, but we hear about at weddings, at schools, in our local neighborhoods. We know what those are, and we know how to address those. And we need to be part of really architecting this. So it's really that collaboration with the spirit of knowing and truly believing that the local voices and those with lived experience are capable of architecting, should be put in that position of power, and should have the resources and support to then be able to follow it up. Now, I'm going to just add one more piece to this question, and that is really, Dr. Mandari mentioned the psychosocial support. I think one thing that struck me most when I was starting in my own advocacy was how isolating it is. It's an incredibly isolating experience, because for many of these advocates, they are saying things that are actively going against the grain of what is socially acceptable and normal. And at the same time, they have multilateral and global organizations that don't necessarily understand why they're framing it in a particular way, because it's more socially, it's more socially nuanced, or why they've chosen to take a particular path on women's health, or why they're speaking about certain specific things in specific contexts with particular audiences. And I do think that isolation can be devastating for advocates. I do think we end up actually losing quite a few advocates, particularly when it comes to things like gender equity. When I started, I was 21, and I remember within the first 2 years, the vast majority of my own classmates and friends who had been working with me started working on youth and climate, rather than really looking at all at gender, because it was just so controversial and they felt so isolated. And I do think that psychosocial support needs to be ingrained and embedded in the way that we operate in community. It needs to be part of, because as excellent as this commission is, it's going to need really strong advocates to take it forward. And every single incredible piece of every single advancement, be it, Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security, or be it the Sustainable Development Goals, or, I mean, they are living documents only when you have strong advocates. And so really supporting and sustaining those advocates, I think, becomes critical. So that psychosocial support is one that I hope that all organizations begin to embed in the way in which they operate in country and community.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morabit. Thank you for your perspectives. Really interesting. Chris, if I may go to you now, on donors, how can donors work to implement some of the recommendations in the report and facilitate, quote, implementation research to continue to explore the knowledge gaps that remain? In your experience, what are some of the best practices for donors like USAID?
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for this opportunity. Pardon me. Yeah, thank you, Pam. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss these findings, and congratulations to the Commission. Because agencies like USAID not only fund, but design and implement billions of dollars in assistance, the findings in this report can have considerable impact. I'd like to build on some of the points that Dr. Al-Mandari made, such as the need for a holistic approach, as well as points made by Dr. Morabit, such as flexibility and how we view local collaboration. First, throughout the report, we see the importance of a broader interdisciplinary approach to supporting transformative change. The report notes the relationships between health equity and gender equality and social economic processes. And there's one sentence it really I think illustrates this. It says from the report, the social determinants of health are important drivers of health equity and gender equality and include economic factors, education, health, healthcare, infrastructure, the social and community context. So reading the report underscored one of the lessons I've learned from my development experience is the importance of an interdisciplinary approach to transformative change, and how this change can be hamstrung sometimes by overly narrow sectoral programming. The result of a sectoral program may be a successful output, but not always transformative change. And I saw this when I was in Madagascar. When I was there, I asked myself, why is Madagascar GDP per capita at that time, and even today, less than it was in 1980, despite decades of donor support? Cycles of instability and conflict regularly erase development gains. And traditionally, donor programs have taken a stovepiped approach, a limited health sector approach, for example, on diseases like malaria or plague, or even across other sectors like food insecurity or environmental programming. Often they miss the broader impacts these programs could have had, particularly on the causes of instability. And so this is what the Commission's research challenges us to do, to consider the linkages and think holistically. But unfortunately, the development architecture creates barriers to interdisciplinary approaches that are reinforced by institutional silos and funding structures. You all know that each sector is a unique discipline with its own specialized experts, approaches, theories, intellectual frameworks, even sector-specific indicators, and earmarked restrictive funding. And that makes it all the more difficult to understand how to achieve that virtual cycle of self-reinforcing feedback loops. Implementing the findings of this report may be challenging given the architecture of development and humanitarian agencies that can't be changed overnight, but there are things that we can do right now. I mean, remember, one, that funding sources may be stovepipe, but implementation doesn't have to be. So from my experience, I believe it's not just what one does, it's how one does it. So if we are implementing a health program, but only achieving basic health outcomes, are we doing a good job? Or can we also work to reinforce good governance and accountability, to empower local leaders? Can we reinforce the relationship between the community and local government? And can we advance health equity and gender equality? As the report recommends, we should avoid the cut and paste universal approach to programming. Sectoral approaches tend to rely on unique intellectual frameworks. So if it worked in Senegal, why not Sri Lanka? Development agencies should base their programming on a sophisticated understanding of the political, social, and economic dynamics. And the report says this. The report notes that health systems are never neutral. They are social systems, deeply embedded in the local context, influenced by history, culture, and politics and the economy. The report also recognizes the importance of local solutions. I mean, for example, local governments are the basic building blocks of good governance. Throughout our programs, what are we doing to strengthen this relationship? And the importance of the community health workers. Through our health programs, are we building the next generation of community leaders? In countries where I've worked, I've seen individuals make the transition from community health worker to civil society leader to national reformer. And finally, development agencies need to focus on the dynamics of accountability. Effective local organizations are downwardly accountable to the communities they serve and represent. Donors who come in with large amounts of funding can unwittingly flip that relationship. Local organizations become upwardly accountable to donors at the expense of that downward accountability to their communities, and we need to be aware of that. I'll be very brief. Your final point was on research. There is an exciting learning agenda. Carolyn covered it. It's also found in panel 27 of the report. And I could detail a lot of research I think would contribute, but I want to just make two overarching points. One, the first step is better data. The Commission's examination of data found substantial shortcomings and insufficient investment in collecting and creating the kinds of disaggregated and intersectional statistical resources that are needed. And finally, how the research is done. I want to echo the report's recommendation on research. It should be done with a commitment to interdisciplinary and inclusive research approaches. The research itself should build bridges across the gender equality and health equity fields and across peace and conflict studies and the various other research communities. There is so much in this report that I look forward to hearing some questions from our audience. Back to you, Pam.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, we have many questions. We're running out of time, so I'm going to go straight into them. I'm going to take two questions at a time. So, and I'm opening up the floor to our panelists as well as Val and Carolyn. Please try and be succinct so that we can get as many questions as we can in the next 10 minutes. Question one, health equity and gender equality is shown in the framework as parallel processes on the pathway to peace. Can you speak more to how they are interconnected? And the second question, how do you see the civil society sector contributing towards positive reinforcement cycles as we move forward in our awareness of health equity and peace symbiosis, while engagements with international governance nevertheless remain static? Who'd like to take those? Well, the first ones I think are at Val and Carolyn.
Sure, I'll jump in. Thank you very much, Pam, and thank you to the audience member who asked those questions. I think the report simplifies these processes for the purpose of parsimony. It's clear that health equity and gender equality are mutually intertwined, and we see that most evidently in sexual and reproductive health and rights, and the importance of recognizing sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also providing the services to realize them. So I think that within each context, the dynamics of the relationship between gender equality and health equity differ according to the particular political, social, and economic environment. But we do emphasize the importance and the critical role of the health sector in acting as a banner leader or a leader in promoting gender equality and in ensuring that their approaches have that principle embedded within health services and systems. So it's not a satisfactory answer to a very complicated question, but I appreciate the question very much. Can you remind me the civil society question? That might be better for someone else.
Yeah, how do you see the civil society sector contributing towards positive reinforcement cycles as we move forward in our awareness of health equity and peace symbiosis, while engagements with international governance nevertheless remain static? Who would like to take that?
Yeah. Hi, I can quickly jump in.
Yeah, sure, Karen.
Thanks. So as we've been highlighting throughout the report, that the changes have to be endogenous, they have to be inside out. So one role the civil society actors can be involved in is they need to lead these coordination and support these coordination processes at the local and national levels, just so that, you know, we can monitor progress, have evaluation processes. One of the key gaps that we identified is that, you know, policies are initiated, but there's no evaluation, there's no monitoring. So it's implemented, but then you don't go back to evaluate to see, is it effective? Is it making the changes that you want? So civil society actors can actually really be involved in this process of monitoring and evaluating any policies that are implemented at local, community, and national level as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carolyn. So again, a question for Val and Carolyn. What are the potential size of impact of each of the recommendations in different contexts towards making society more peaceful? Is there a particular order, goodness, in which recommendations should be approached? And then the next question to Dr. Morabit, great to see the role of advocacy highlighted. What are the indicators and type of evidence used to validate the statement that advocacy is essential? Actually, that's open to Val and Carolyn as well. Over to both of you. All of you, sorry. Potential size of impact?
Maybe I'll just quickly answer that with a non-answer. I think that is something that we really need more research for. One of the things that we talked about amongst ourselves as a writing team was that we weren't doing that kind of evaluation role, both in terms of health and gender in relation to other sectoral interventions. And so I think that is something that would be needed, and it would be kind of at a case study granular level. So I think I agree that it's an important question, and we just simply don't have the answer to that. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues to answer the others. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Val.
Yeah. And just to add to that, there is no, you start with this recommendation and then follows the next. They're interrelated. You have to work on them at the same time. They don't work in isolation.
Yeah. Advocacy. What are the indicators and types of evidence?
So I'm to understand, we mean advocacy broadly, which would be a long laundry list, but I'll give a few examples. So as we know, advocacy is an incredibly powerful tool to drive change. And I appreciate that sometimes the impact can be indirect or challenging to measure quantitatively. But there are numerous studies and instances that show its impact. So I'll give a few kind of examples. You have legislative change, which is, advocacy campaigns often lead to new results or revisions in existing ones. Off the top of my head, you can think of a lot of the advancements made for women, LGBTQ communities, et cetera. You also see a significant shift in public awareness and attitude. So if you think of things like the anti-tobacco campaigns and the level of advocacy that's really driven strong shifts there. In health specifically, I mean, you have incredible surges of funding due to advocacy. If you think of things like Gavi and the Global Fund, the billions of dollars that have gone into really creating the right ecosystem for research, prevention, and treatment for these diseases. And then, of course, you continue to move into the fact that advocacy, I think, has single-handedly helped shift a lot of what we're seeing in terms of our corporate behavior as well. We know that it is because of consumer advocacy that a lot of companies are changing their own focus and looking at how they put dollars back into communities, with climate being top of that list. You're looking at advocacy influencing media coverage. You're looking at it influencing institutional practice. And of course, I mean, there are the huge case studies of the civil rights movement, different anti-racism movements that have driven significant shifts. So I'm not sure if the question was broadly on advocacy, but I hope that helped answer kind of all of the ways in which advocacy has transformed the landscape that we live and work in, and a recognition that it is actually local voices. It is those sustained local voices, not the ones that parachute in and out, but sustained local voices that really transform their communities. We see it everywhere in the world, and we see it in global health every day. We see it in gender equity every day. So please do continue to support advocates in your organizations and institutions, and continue to fund them flexibly, and ensure that they have they're being amplified and platformed in a way that is really responsive to what their community needs.
Brilliant. Thank you. Really great examples. Dr. Al-Mandari, you mentioned some examples of joint action for health, peace and security in the EMRO region. Can you provide a specific example on how the UN system is collaborating in the region on these questions?
Yeah, thank you for this question. In fact, myself, I have witnessed and experienced a situation in Yemen, and as you all know, the situation in Yemen for the last maybe 8 or 9 years. One of the challenges that we were facing there is maternal and child health, in which we see large number of maternal deaths, large number of deaths below 5 for children, and also infant mortality death rates high. So for the last 4 years, we have been working with authorities on both sides, the conflicting parties, telling them that, look, Yemeni child is a concern for you all, regardless of his or her location. So we managed to bring technical teams from both sides, from the conflicting parties to Cairo, to different countries in the region, have meetings, discussions at a technical level, come out with a lot of recommendations, and share these recommendations with their seniors in order, for those seniors to take their responsibilities in terms of facilitating the implementation of whatever recommendations, to make sure that mothers, women, children are really receiving the care they deserve from us as UN agencies, based on the relevance of the program, like UNICEF, WHO, but also from the local authorities, to make sure, to improve access to the healthcare facilities, to improve access to the houses of those families who cannot really move and drive many hours, to the healthcare facility. So this is simply an example that we have really taken to Yemen. Back to you, Mr. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mandari. And I think we've got one more question we can just sneak in if we can. Chris, this might be one for you that you could respond to. The report suggests emphasis is on global south, but interaction between peace, gender equality and health equity may also be relevant to high income countries such as the USA, particularly sexual health and reproduction limitations placed on women. Is this a fair observation?
My personal opinion is absolutely. The virtuous cycle that the report notes, the examples of advocacy, for example, that Dr. Murabit noted, those are examples also from higher income countries. And so I think these principles apply across these different contexts. What I think we need to do, though, and what the report suggests, is understand that dynamic more. For example, understand what it means inside countries at various levels of conflict, at the various stages of conflict, and at various stages of societal change. So I think the report, its findings are broadly applicable, and they set up an exciting learning agenda for us to look into. And in doing so, we need to continue to elevate this discussion, because the importance of the discussion is now, in today's world of a polycrisis, of a world where there's less trust, I think is more critical than ever before. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Chris. And on that note, I need to close the Q&A, but thank you all very much. And thanks to the audience for some brilliant questions. Sorry we couldn't answer them all. We're now going to move to sort of closing, unfortunately, because I feel we've just got going. But to close this launch event and provide some closing remarks, I'd like to introduce Professor Peter Friberg, the Commission Co-Chair and Professor of the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, whose vision, as I mentioned earlier, was behind this report. And then finally, the Lancet's Editor-in-Chief, Richard Horton. Over to you both.
Thanks very much, Pam. Yes, this is indeed a complex commission, and it will not cause and create peace tomorrow, that's for sure. We need to have a long-term view here. And that is what was mentioned also before, that we need lots of dialogues, meetings, discussions, several launches. So keep your eyes open and bring ideas to the table and continue discussions. And there are several already planned, like at Johns Hopkins, for example, and the Aga Khan Foundation in Canada, also at the Wilson Center later on this month. And we are also planning to have an Asian launch at the Prince Mahidol Award Conference as a side event at the PMAC in the end of January next year. And one of the founders, Swedish the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is also planning to have something. And also, indeed, I would like to take up also on Dr. Mandari's words. We have had a very nice and good support of EMRO during these years and a good discussion climate. And I hope that maybe the Commission and the report here can provide some good evidence for continuing work with you, and also with this report, the Global Health Peace Initiative, that is WHO is processing with, and particularly with the SDG 5 and the gender, of course, gender equality and the evidence from the Commission, I think would be important. Let me just also then have just two brief points. First, youth, incredibly important. In the Commission, we had 2 commissioners for the next generation at the time for PhD students. And I think this is so important to have these young people also at the decision tables. You need to be there. And we, as more seniors, need to pave the way for that. And there is no difference between, I mean, being a scientist and to present advocacy. Scientists have to be advocates as well. Bring out the evidence, and there's no difference between that. And I think we should do much more about that. I mean, just think about the youth organizations for peace, as you represent as well, Ala, and also, I mean, for the climate organizations. I mean, you are running the world, more or less. So just more engagement with youth, I advocate for. Second, collaboration. This commission is an interdisciplinary one, connecting scientists from different fields: gender, health, political science, and conflict, peace and conflict. It has not been an easy process. Of course, it's incredibly difficult to work from different cultures, different areas, but that's the way forward. That is the fruitful way of doing it. And I think we have at least having a start with this commission. And I would urge scientists, other scientists, and policy and decision makers really to engage more in collaboration to tackle these effects and bring efforts to this polycrisis that was mentioned, that we actually are in a dangerous time today. And this commission focuses on health equity and gender equality for peace. But we need also to realize that also other factors like the environment, environmental changes, and the climate also need to be recognized. And we cannot just handle these big issues just separately in silos, as was discussed also before. I mean, some countries in conflict have temperatures up towards 50 Celsius. And of course, has a huge impact on people. So we need to think a little bit broader and trying to come up with joint solutions. And finally, the global military spending exceeded $2.1 trillion 2021, $2.1 trillion, almost a doubling since the millennium shift. Just imagine if just a fraction of that money could go into health services, strengthening of economic, political, and social structures. Then we would have a chance. Then we would have a chance not only to fulfill the SDG 3, 5, and 16, as this commission has done, but also to achieve the whole 2030 agenda and beyond. And we are not there, definitely not. So let me end with just thank everyone for the involved in the work for the commission, and not the least also I would like to compliment the Lancet to establish such a compelling commission, a bit outside the traditional health box. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Richard.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you.
Last words.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody. President Halonen, thank you for your immense time and commitment. We know you're busy and have many other commitments, but you've been fantastic in supporting our work. Val and Carolyn, absolutely brilliant presentations representing the writing team, all the commissioners. Dr. Al-Mandari, you've been a trooper as always, supporting this process. You're a true friend of the Lancet, and we're a true friend of EMRO, so thank you. And Chris and Ala, wonderful that you joined us today. Thank you for your insights. And of course, to Sarah and the Wilson Center, it's a real honor to have the collaboration. Now, you can see I've got white hair, which means I'm very old. And I can remember in the 1990s walking into Vukovar in the northeastern part of Croatia. And I've never seen such devastation. Every building was rendered into rubble. It was just after the civil war that broke out after the end of Yugoslavia. And I can remember visiting mass graves of people, women, children, men, families, murdered just because of their nationality, their identity, their faith. I can remember going into one hospital where all of the patients had been taken out of the hospital and summarily murdered. I can remember meeting and sitting with women's groups that had been set up in response to systematic rape during the conflict. The intimate connections between health, gender, and conflict have always been there, but never been quite so intensely studied, I think, as in this commission. I do remember in the 1990s, there was a lot of optimistic talk about the idea of peace through health. And the World Health Organization set up several initiatives in that particular region of the former Yugoslavia on peace through health, but they were never sustained. And the evidence was always a little bit anecdotal and maybe a little bit too optimistic. So this is a real opportunity for us that we really can't afford to miss. Since the time of Thomas Hobbes, that ancient but rather beloved philosopher who spoke about how nasty, brutish, and short life can be, we've understood how citizens have an unwritten contract with the state. We accept, you and I accept, a duty to obey a political authority, provided that that authority fulfills its duty to protect us in return. And that, in fact, that unwritten contract is the foundation for the legitimacy of this thing we call the state. But what happens when that contract is broken by either party? What happens when that contract comes under severe pressure, such as in a crisis or a conflict? And what I think is so brilliant about this commission, so utterly unique about this commission, is that it has investigated and truly illuminated the nature of this unwritten contract and has made immensely compelling discoveries about the centrality of health equity and gender equality to peace and social justice. These findings have massive implications for policymakers and politicians, and for those of us who work in health. It's not just for decision makers, it's for all of us as citizens. If you think it's the citizens and the state and the representatives of the state, we all have responsibilities here. And they provide us with further justification to take health equity and gender equality even more seriously as social values and norms, but more than social values and norms, as development goals and political objectives. And the health sector, if I just speak about my own small corner of the world, has an absolutely critical role, as we've heard, absolutely, in advocacy and creating that. And it was so beautifully said this afternoon, the social consensus, building the social consensus. It's our responsibility, not somebody else's responsibility, to build this social consensus for health equity and gender equality, and to go beyond advocacy, as you said in your presentations, towards action and implementation. So we at the Lancet are certainly going to be following up with the Commission. We'll give you a month or two as break, because I think you might never speak to us again if we wrote to you within the next hour and asked you to do any more. But we are going to come back to explore opportunities for re-energizing the group, broadening the group to build even stronger evidence for action, to build a powerful coalition. It's too important not to do that. Thank you for embodying the spirit of opportunity in your words and your deeds. It's been truly magnificent, truly inspirational. A million thanks, and thanks to Pam for moderating the whole event. So thank you.
Thank you, Richard and Peter, for closing out the event so strongly. Thanks to all of our expert panelists and President Halonen and the Commission members for your commentary. Thank you to the Wilson Centre, the Lancet, of course, and the Commission for making this event possible. The event recording will become available within the next 24 hours. There'll be an event summary which will be produced and published on the New Security Beat blog, and the Commission report can be found at www.thelancet.com. So thank you all, thanks everyone, and good night. Goodbye.